And so quite often machine learning, data science expert, they're faced with something that isn't potentially even not particularly geared towards AI. There are mathematical problems that just are not geared to it. So basically, I remember it sort of the last Christmas party we had. One of our quieter senior data scientists, he had to make a small speech. It just turned out that way, and I thought, okay, what will happen now? And he said a few words, and then he said, "Forestry is an area where AI actually works."
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Christof, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now, for today, we're talking the specifics around forest management. We're talking about forest inventories. And before you fall asleep, we're talking about something pretty cool. We're talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning as it is applied to forest inventory. And the two folks that we got to come on to talk about this are from over in Europe, from across the pond. First of all, we have Rolf Schmitz. He is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Collective Crunch. And we also brought in Collective Crunch's chief technology officer, who his name is Christof Danzl. And I was really excited to talk to them because if you don't know, my day job is forest inventories. And as such, I get really excited when we're talking shop about this kind of things. And we didn't get lost in the details here. I tried to keep it more higher level, more, what can this do? What does this offer the public and industry and the market? And then also, how is this changing things, right? How is this going to change the way we manage forests? What kind of opportunities does this represent? How good is it? Right? What are the limitations? That was a big one for me. What are the limitations of applying something like machine learning to something like forest inventories? Right? And those are very important things because I wanted to know, where is this technology at really? Right? And it was a great conversation with both of them. They were both very open and honest about everything that's going on, the technology they're using, the limitations they've seen, the excitement that they have. And I was very, very thankful to have them join me. So, sponsors for this episode. Wes Fraser is the number one sponsor for 2022. And without them, this would not be possible. So thank you, Wes Fraser, for all of your support. It has not gone unnoticed. Thank you. And GreenLink Forestry is the only other sponsor for 2022. Without them, again, not be possible. They've been with me since the beginning, so thank you, GreenLink. And with that, let's dive into this concept of high technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence in the traditionally non-technological space of forestry. Although, I will say, becoming more and more so high-tech as time goes on. So, let's do this. Here we go. First of all, thanks a lot for joining me, both of you, Rolf and Christof. First off, before we get going, let's just get you both to introduce yourselves quickly, and then we'll get into it. So, Rolf, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Rolf Schmitz. I'm based in Bavaria, actually. I have a technical background, coming from mobile and internet services and such. And, and excited to be here. Thank you very much for having us. I'm the CEO of Collective Crunch, I should say.
Awesome. Thank you. And, Christof?
Yes. Hello, Matt. Glad to be here. My name is Christof Danzl, one of the co-founders of Collective Crunch. My background is in computer science and data analytics.
Gotcha. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you to both of you. And we'll get more into your passion and why you're doing this work here right away. So Rolf, I'll start with you. I want to know why you're doing this work. So you don't have a history or a background in forestry or in environmental sciences or anything like that. So how did you get into forest inventory work and why has it become important to you?
Yeah, so we the three of us have a much more sort of a deep tech and sort of commercial high-tech background. And when we started to think about what to do, we were basically the sort of what today is the mission, and the initial interest was, can we use advanced analytics and our backgrounds with environmental data and improve business processes. We're effectively B2B people, have been through our career. So that seemed to be an interesting one. And we iterated through a couple of things, and basically through a couple of iterations, we basically came to, can we do AI-based forest value chains? And we had pilot projects with UPM and Stora Enso, which are the sort of the big players in Finland. Okay. And and so basically that's how it started. Personal level, sort of why environment, we're kind of all country bums. Christof grew up in Tyrol in Austria. I grew up in the German countryside, Jarkko in the Finnish countryside. So there was sort of a connection to nature that was definitely there.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, I suppose there's always that natural. Everybody's got a little bit of a drawing towards the natural world, forests, nature, plants, animals, all that kind of stuff, right? There's always something. There's something romantic about it. I think we're all drawn to it at some level, right? So getting into why specifically you felt that you had something to offer. I'm curious about that. Like, how did you find this whole talk? We're talking about like artificial intelligence in forest inventories and that kind of thing. And to me, it seems like a big jump to go from, these very technical people, all about, the technology and systems and that kind of thing, jumping into, okay, how do we apply this to something we know nothing about? How did you make that jump?
Yeah. So we came from this idea of, environmental data, and we iterated a few things. We did something in energy, predicting energy from wind farms, and found that a relatively crowded market. And then actually, I think the impulse was that Jarkko visited family. There's somebody who's got a lot of forests, and basically they were kind of saying, they cut a lot of forest recently, and I kind of sold it to them, but God knows what happens now. And we were sort of, how come? I mean, it's your forest. Somebody cuts it. How does that process work? And so we got into that, and fairly early on, we kind of said, okay, but this is really sort of a statistical thing, isn't it? Which then leads towards analytics and so forth. But it was really sort of family from Jarkko that sort of got the three of us to think about that. And Christof had sort of some background in it from his past and sort of family owning forests. So that kind of was the trigger when we were sort of exploring different things. And then this forestry thing comes, and something to really keep in mind here, we're a Finnish-German company. In Finland, forestry is really, really big. I mean, that it's sort of what the company is. It's a bit like cars in Germany. So it's really big. And so there was immediately, when we started talking about forestry in Finland, there was a lot of like, wow, these guys are doing high tech with forestry. There's a lot of interest there. Yeah. And in Germany, forestry is big as well. It's a bigger country economically, but sort of relatively it's nowhere near where it is in Finland, but there is still sort of genuine interest, and it's an important sector.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. So, Christof, you said, or Rolf mentioned that you had some family ties to owning forests and managing forests a little bit. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? How that tied into your desire to want to join something like Collective Crunch?
Well, back then I was not actually involved in forest maturation or forest inventories at all. But of course it influenced my choice of basically what kind of my work preferences, or the choice of basically topics. And in Collective Crunch, like Rolf said in the beginning, the only thing we were sure about is that we wanted to use environmental data, even though we were not, let's say, had no scientific background, but that was a given. Mm-hmm. And we basically were looking then for a good match that basically plays to our interests, but also to the strengths and to the market needs. And we found really our best fit then in the forestry side, simply because of this connection to Finland and the rich Finnish forest industry. And first, one project leads to the other. One client, successful client project, basically educated us, showed us that there is actually demand, that this actually makes a lot of sense. And then one thing led to the next. So from one in Finland, there are really forestry giants that are also internationally there. Actually, our very first project was actually in Latin America from a Finnish forest subsidiary, so to speak.
Okay.
They had such a global footprint already. There are Swedish, Finnish companies active in China and so on. This is not a local business.
Right. No, it's just fascinating. And the reason I asked the question was because I feel like the forest industry and surrounding industries in North America, there's varying degrees of inventory as you go from, province or state, or you jump around, right? There's varying degrees and varying amounts of understanding that way. And I feel like there's always this push, forestry being not a super crazy lucrative business for the most part, at least at the small scale. There's always this push for, as I suppose there is in every industry, for more efficiency and more efficiency and faster and all this kind of stuff. And especially in the realm of inventory, because it feels like with the technology coming out that we should be able to automate more, and we should be able to speed things up, and we should be able to get better, higher quality, more dependable data, right? And I feel like the artificial intelligence thing, the automated inventory thing, is something that's been people have been talking about for 10 or 15 years, at least here in Canada. I'm sure the same is true in Europe. And I think it's just something where there's a lot of mystique around it, right? We're still trying to figure out, okay, where do the chips lie? What can we actually do? What can't we actually do? Where are the holes? And it's this interesting place. So but there's not a lot of people, I don't think, at least in North America, folks like yourselves with the technological background going into the forest space to do this, right? Because I think there's a lot of other places where they maybe find it more lucrative or whatever, right? Where they go there first. So, which is fair enough. So it's interesting to get your guys' thoughts on that. So, before we jump into, I want to actually kind of break down a little bit, because we're talking about forest management. Like my context is Canada, mostly Canada, right? Very different. We have a lot of forests. We're still kind of running our first pass in most places. Whereas in Europe, it's very, very different, highly intensive. Everyone's, you kind of know what everything is. So can we talk a little bit quickly about the history of forest inventory in Europe and forest management quickly, just to give people an idea of the type of forests you're talking about modeling and doing inventories for?
Well, the history of forest inventory in Europe goes back quite a long time, hundreds of years.
Yeah, you don't say.
Literally, yeah.
Arguably thousands, right?
North America.
Yeah.
And actually, it's interesting to ask yourself, why do forest inventories exist in the first place, right? So
exactly, sure.
It has to do with the realization that forests and trees and wood is just a scarce resource. It doesn't exist in unlimited. There's not an unlimited supply. So people realized during the industrial age, when mining activities started to become more intense and generally more people needed more fuel, that actually you can extract too much wood from the forest, and then you're left with not enough for the future generations. So a few hundred years ago, people started to realize that there is a need to manage the resource wood sustainably.
Right.
And the way to actually achieve that is through realizing how much you have and how much you can afford to extract on a regular basis, right? On a small scale and also on a larger scale. And the first really countrywide forest inventories as we know them today, they had only started really 100 years ago.
Okay. Yep.
In Finland, and forerunners were Finland, Sweden, the Nordic countries, basically. And to some degree also the Central European countries, which are also forest rich and quite scientifically on the scientific forerunners like Germany, Austria, Switzerland to some degree.
Right.
That's where we are also seeing now the biggest, let's say, they're again on the forefront of adopting remote sensing for the national forest inventories and also more and more sophisticated techniques to use the remote sensing data.
Gotcha. Yeah, you got to know, if you want to manage something, you got to know what you have first, right? Like it's otherwise you're just kind of walking around in the dark. So no, it totally makes sense. Obviously the forest management in Europe, like you said, it's been going on for a very long time, and initially more or less sounded like for wood, for fuel kind of thing. When we talk about a place like Europe that has such intensive forest management history, when you talk about doing an inventory, there must be a lot of historical data to go off of, is there not? There must be a lot of different resources. Prior to you guys coming on scene and trying to do the artificial intelligence thing, what was the state of an inventory? What did an inventory look like?
Well, the way how the inventory has been done on a national level, for example, also let's say smaller scale for individual owners, has been this through statistical sampling. So cruising, collecting field data, and then doing in a statistical fashion, making estimates on an area basis across a certain region or even on a country scale.
Okay.
Those data have been typically done by this national forest organization, forestry, government organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time with so-called permanent sample plots, and these are not actually usually shared. Yeah, so this data is not publicly available for various reasons.
So private ground truthing data for the most part.
Yeah, either if it's from a private forest owner, they wouldn't share it, obviously. But if it's also from the public, even if it's funded with public money for security reasons or privacy reasons, it's also not shared if it's a permanent plot. Yeah.
Okay.
So this, it's in the countries that we have been working in so far, Finland, Sweden, also Baltics, these permanent sample plots with basically yearly measurements of the same spots, they are sacred. They're hidden.
Gotcha.
But then there have been also a lot of, let's say, other measurements accompanying LiDAR campaigns. Those were more done on an ad hoc fashion, and those ground observations are then often shared in because they're not considered so critical.
Gotcha. Okay.
So this was a kind of ground data that has been available to start off with doing remote sensing-based inventories. Obviously, you need some in-situ data always to test and calibrate your models.
Absolutely. So there was, what were the technologies used in the past? Like, I guess everything from aerial imagery, you had LiDAR up probably in the last 10 years, 15 years, you had LiDAR, and then ground truthing imagery. So very similar to what we got going on over here then, right? And then, so the AI portion is really just stepping that up a notch, I'm assuming. So yeah, why the artificial intelligence? Do you think it's an opportunity to just do things cheaper, or do you think there's opportunity there for, a better product and for, more data, better quality, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, acquiring data is fairly expensive. LiDAR is being done in 5 to 10 year cycles because of the cost. And so, we enrich that data and put it in the context of much, broader data sets like satellite imagery, other methods of sensing that satellites are good at. And we enrich the data in these sort of plots of scans of LiDAR. Between that, we can fill the gaps. And so one is that, we bring a lot of data to bear, and that gets a better product. But at the same time, because you have less dependency on data acquisition, it also gets cheaper. So that's sort of the equation that largely comes out of this. And in that can lead into kind of two ways. One is a customer might just say, I don't want to fly LiDAR in future. I want to fly it less frequently, or I want to know more. I keep flying, and you just, do me more accurate inventory. So in that sense, it's a bit of a sliding scale. But the thing that sort of kind of, I'm just sort of thinking of something that brought it to, for the team itself that's working on this, that really sort of brought it home, was quite often, AI related to AI is fancy, people want to do AI, somebody says, can you do AI for me? And so quite often machine learning, data science expert, they're faced with something that isn't potentially even not particularly geared towards AI. There are mathematical problems that just are not geared to it. So basically, I remember it's sort of the last Christmas party we had. One of our quieter senior data scientists, he had to make a small speech. It just turned out that way, and I thought, okay, what will happen now? And he said a few words, and then he said, "Forestry is an area where AI actually works," and everybody was nodding, particularly the data science team. And so there is a rewarding bit that forestry has always been about statistics and heavy statistics and the sampling and so forth. Mm-hmm. And now we bring a lot of data to bear, and the data scientists see it actually working. So that's that's something that's exciting for the team, but it's also something that's exciting for the customers, that they basically see, okay, we can cut on LiDAR. This is actually something that's working. This is actually adding value. We can, reduce some of the very expensive LiDAR flying, or, we can get better insights in enriching the data. And there's sort of I would say there's a bit of excitement around that whole AI thing, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. There's definitely an excitement around the concept of AI and more technology. And so, here's a question that I meant to ask earlier and forgot to ask, but it's a good placement for it, because you talked about why it's important for the industry and for the customer. In Canada, and I'm assuming in Europe too, there's national forests, right? Like we have mostly, we call it crown land here in Canada, being a commonwealth and all that. But it's public land. And so it's a public resource, and that's mainly what we're managing for. Why should the public care about better technology, better inventories? What does it provide the public besides, obviously economy? Good economy is good. But bigger than that, richer than that, what else does it provide that people can take stock in and be excited about? That's
a very good question. And sort of we had, intrinsically sort of what's our value added, as a company and so forth. And forestry is a limited resource, as Christof said in the beginning. And, there's this impact, climate change, or overall, biodiversity, all these sort of big topics of where we sort of as a society and as a global society is a big word, but, where we need to change.
Yeah.
And so if we take this into sort of Canada, why would I be interested? The more efficient use of commercial forests is sort of in the interest of society, because it leaves room for natural forests and so forth. If you want to absorb carbon with forests, the most efficient way of doing that is a single species plantation. Now, that is not necessarily close to what you would call a forest as a kid or as a general person of interest. And so, in any case, if you keep biodiversity in a natural forest, if you want to really optimize carbon capture, or if you want to use commercial forests, there is a strong case of making the best use of that resource. And so that's something that we contribute to, and where we're getting also from investor perspective a lot of positive feedback, because when we talked about how we started, it was largely commercial forest, but it was always in our minds that forests are pretty good at carbon capture. Mm-hmm. And then this biodiversity thing came along that creates a lot of interest. And so we've moved from a fairly niche, will help the commercial companies to get more efficient and basically gaining a lot of data and a lot of machine learning insights. We move to something that's much more now turned into a societal debate. What are we doing with our forests? Sort of what's the impact if we develop it commercially? Can we do more on the carbon side? Resilience of forests is a big thing now, with bark beetles and things like that. So we've moved from sort of this niche Finland commercial thing into a much broader thing, where now people are saying, okay, this is really, and including investors, this is really interesting. This is something that sort of can really drive our understanding of forests. So that's how we today interact with the investment community, if you like.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, and again, I'm speaking from my perspective from Canada because I don't know exactly how it works over there. But we talk a lot in Canada, and I think even in the States, they talk a lot about the concept of social license, right? And that with the increase in communication with the internet, everyone's starting, the transparency is there now, right? You can see everything that is on national forests or public forests, and people want to know, okay, what are you doing for me? What are you doing for the values that I have, that I put forth? And it's something that we're constantly talking about. And I think a lot of times the public here in North America, they recognize that forest management, forest industry is able to grow back trees. But what they're not convinced of is that they're able to protect those other resources like water, like biodiversity, like species at risk, all those types of things, right? And I feel like those are the battlefields right now for forest management, is being like, okay, how do we actually make sure that we're doing this and show it and showcase it and be proud of it and make sure that it is the right thing, that what we're doing is going to be good for all of these things. Do you see room for AI providing opportunity there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the sort of really hot topics at the moment is biodiversity and sort of the impact of commercial forestry and so forth. So one of the big corporates that we're engaged with, they basically said, okay, we looked at at carbon offsets, which is sort of getting a little bit of a bad name at the moment because of greenwashing. And they looked at the supply chain and basically said, okay, our products, we're manufacturing some sort of, metal-based stuff. So we need ore. Yeah. We are buying off certain mines, and we want to make sure towards our shareholders, stakeholders, and so forth that we're not ruining the planet in doing so. And so now they're interested in a biodiversity tracking around the mines from which they buy, which then gives them this sort of towards society, like, okay, we're mining because you want mobile phones and iPads. So, but we're doing it in a sustainable way. We're doing it in a responsible way. So another thing of that where I see now a lot sort of driven from corporates and investors, but where really society is behind it, like, carbon, compensating carbon footprints and so forth. Most companies are basically doing it to communicate to their customers our products are clean, which is sort of very much a societal angle. And one of the issues there is baselining. If you get the same YouTube links that I get, there's a couple of very infamous projects there. And part of that problem is baselining. And baselining has been not done all that great. And so one of the things that we could provide and that we're thinking about and sort of debating and applying the technology we have to better baselines so that you have a data-driven baseline that isn't exposed to kind of the conflict of interest when a project is set up, because the worse your baseline, the better your profit. You need to get the project off the ground. There's sort of an inbuilt conflict there. But we can basically with AI-driven modeling and so forth, and the application of lots of data, we can give a corporate or a society not globally, that's not doable on that scale right away, but ultimately we're looking to go to something that provides on a really on scale country level, that kind of thing, baselines that can be trusted because they're data driven, they're verifiable and so forth. So that's one of the things where we don't see it from consumers because they don't know that we exist, frankly. But we can definitely see it from corporates that say, okay, we see other corporates investing in project ABC, and then you get infamous on YouTube and you get all this sort of pressure pushback that is greenwashing, and we can bring data to that conversation and better modeling.
Yeah, and that's crucial, right? I think that's the downfall of the greenwashing, right?
Hopefully,
is backing it up with data and be like, no, look, here's the satellite imagery we have from yesterday that shows that this is what's going on, and no, it hasn't been whatever, right? So, yeah, that's something that's an interesting point. Yeah, so maybe we should talk about like the uses of the AI inventory. So when we spoke earlier prior to this recording, Rolf, you had mentioned that there are specific uses that Collective Crunch sees this being used for. So yeah, what are those uses?
You can look at it in different scales. That's where I would start. Which just the point that Rolf was just making is that you can look at it on a country scale, for example,
right,
or even wider. And when it when it comes to this impact for society, for the climate, for example, then you have to look at it in this scale, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to do a carbon inventory, or if you want to look at a deforestation baseline, you have to see it in the context of the country or of the whole the whole environment, basically.
Yes.
There has been a lot of issues around. Okay, you conserve a forest here, but then the logging happens somewhere else next to it.
Mm-hmm.
So for this, you need really the scale, and I think this is actually where we always wanted to be, like on this, let's say larger scale, not necessarily just individual forest stands, but looking at larger portfolios, either of forest assets or national inventories.
Right.
On this scale, you do not need, for example, drone data. That would be okay, nice, but it's not needed. Yeah.
Right. There's too much data there, probably. I assume. We work with that here as well, and there's a limit to how much data you can work with, right? Yeah.
Well, it would be just too expensive to acquire, and it would not help you would not add you so much value, even with or without AI, to answer the questions you want to answer.
Right. I like to put it in a way when someone asks me about that, say, well, what does 1 millimeter drone imagery get you that 10 centimeter drone imagery can't get you? And the answer is, when you're talking about managing a stand, it's nothing, but it costs 100 or 1,000 times more. So there's a point to which the higher detail becomes irrelevant and just costly. Yeah, for sure.
Indeed. And we have to see it in the economic benefits, right? Sort of, if you grow commercial forests or a carbon project, whichever it is, there's sort of a limit of how much you can spend on an inventory, because there is sort of a certain context of the value that you can extract from it.
Yeah, and there's limited value added. Sorry.
Christof, please.
So for this use case where you're looking at landscape scale, country scale, there are the challenges that you just simply do not have that much data sources at your disposal, right? You have maybe satellite data of different kinds, but certainly no high-resolution drone imagery, maybe aerial images if you're lucky, LiDAR, depends on the country.
Yeah, yeah.
So the challenge here is to squeeze as much information out of this available data. And that's where AI definitely helps a lot.
Gotcha.
Actually, on the scale, you cannot do any human interpretation of the data anymore, right? As well. So you have to have some sort of a scaling algorithm.
Yeah, and Matt, sort of, if I can sort of put a vanity number up, we're today covering 20 million hectares, so around about 50 million acres. So it's a very substantial area. So when we said initially we came from the tech side, quite often forest inventories and such are done as projects, but we really sort of have a product grade, have built the data engineering architecture to be able to handle data on that scale and so forth. So that's sort of the area that we're aiming at. And there's definitely space for, flying a drone on a couple of stands and really know better. But we really wanted to do this at scale, partially because we started in Finland, and you have, companies that own 3 million hectares, or, Canada is even bigger land masses managed by single entities. So that's sort of an area that we really want to play.
Gotcha.
If you look at a little bit, let's say medium scale, then if you want to manage if you are, let's say, a forest company who owns a lot of assets, or an association of forest owners, or something, an organization that just needs to get accurate inventory data over a larger area, it gets more granular. You have maybe a bit more higher resolution data available, aerial images, maybe LiDAR. Most likely LiDAR scanning data in Northern Hemisphere. And you want to get data down to the assortment level. So you want to know not only just how much volume overall, but how much, let's say, timber versus fiber, pulp, wood will I get out? What will be the average tree dimensions, so that you can actually use that information for efficient planning, purposes.
Yeah, so getting down to the wood utilization aspect of it, yeah.
And then you can go even more to smaller scale and with even higher resolution imagery from drones, for example. And when you go to that level, then you literally identify every single tree. Yeah. And to do that, well, you could try it by hand, but it will be very time consuming, right? So that's that automatic tree segmentation, tree detection and label and classification. That's something obviously that where AI can be used, and its application is a little bit different because what would you need that high precision? Why would you want to identify every single tree? Well, if you want to plan your operations on that level, like what kind of specific trees do I need to care about, then we are getting into this area of precision forestry, basically. Yeah.
Right.
Plan your activities on a tree level.
Yep, absolutely. So you basically talked about all, like, you think it's applicable to it's just depending on the data available. You can apply this AI model to any kind of scale. Where do you see the most effectiveness currently right now in the data? How do you think AI is best applied on the landscape? Is it at the large scale, the fine scale, medium scale? What do you think?
Well, in our the customer segments where we are operating, the medium scale is kind of the dominating one at the moment. We are not into precision forestry and individual tree detection moment, although it certainly has its applications and uses. And we are looking at this large scale inventory, but mostly in this context of the sustainability and doing carbon inventories.
Gotcha. So I think I want to know. I think what I want to know is. I think I want to know the limitations. I think I want to know, because you're talking about basically the gist I'm getting from listening to you is that this can be applied pretty much anywhere. So what do you both see as the limitations to this technology? Just to try and give I want to give a clear picture of what this technology is capable of and where you think it's best applied. Because I'm sure it's not paint everything with one brush. We can do this everywhere. Period. It's the best end all be all. So where do you see the limitations to this? Where does it start to break up?
Christof, do you want to take this? Or?
When it comes to AI, there is if you take a machine learning approach, where
sure,
AI is not necessarily machine learning, but in our times, it's primarily machine learning. Yeah?
Okay.
So there have been also, you can also try to feed a system with a lot of expert knowledge, like pre-programming it, so to speak. And we're doing that to some degree. But at the end of the day, most modern AI systems are based on learning from existing data. So learning the relationship between what you want to predict and basically what sensor data or other source data you have available. Basically, that's already known in advance.
Gotcha. So the more data, the better.
So it actually boils down to the quality of those data. In our case for forest inventories, it's about the data, the remote sensing data, imagery, LiDAR, everything that you measure about the forests for the whole area. And then, of course, the limiting factor is always the resolution primarily and the quality if there's any noise involved.
Gotcha.
When it comes then to the Rolf?
Sorry, I was talking over you. But to me, sort of the AI itself isn't intrinsically, and I think that's what Christof is saying, isn't intrinsically the limit. The limit is what kind of data do I have? And there's certainly an over exuberance at times that, satellite data will, take care of it. And it's just not that good. Of course, the sensors are getting better. You get better and better resolutions. It's a lot of commercial data that is kind of, unfortunately, a little bit too expensive to work in a forestry context where you have sort of a certain limitation of economic value that you can expect to derive, where, let's say, military applications, if you're in Ukraine at the moment, satellite data, you pay whatever it takes. And that's not the case in forestry. So the limiting thing is, as Christof was saying, much more the data. I would say the resolution of satellite imagery and overall data is, getting better, but that's sort of certainly a limiting factor. and those much more than intrinsically the AI.
Gotcha. Right. So, kind of, if you, shit in, shit out, if you so, that kind of thing. So,
I should have thought of that, right?
So that's where the limitation takes place. The AI itself, you're saying, can be applied pretty much anywhere, and that it's just a matter of the better the data, the better the AI is going to be, and that only makes sense. And it's absolutely it's great. Sorry, go ahead, Christof.
When it comes to the ground measurements, which are really essential and which are really scarce and kind of usually a very limiting factor, the one measurements from the ground, not from the satellites and so on. There, it's not only the quality, but also the quantity. Just how many individual measurements do you have? Sometimes with some dozens or hundreds, they won't cut it. You need ideally thousands of measurements, of individual measurements from the ground, and these are not always easy to get. Yeah,
that's fascinating, because that's something I imagine that's pretty specific to Europe, that you would have the luxury of having, that many field sample plots from, for one forest. Because for example, in Canada, we don't even have access to most of it until you build a road there. Right. So it's kind of a different situation. Not to say that it doesn't work. There's versions of this going on here as well. But, I'm just trying to get a feel for where the technology is. Right. Cause I think what I like is knowing exactly what is applicable now. Cause I feel like Rolf, you mentioned earlier, the concept of greenwashing, right? And I feel like that easily happens, or snowballing. It happens in these technology areas where people get kind of confused. They get excited about the technology and the promises and the salesmanship, and then they don't know enough to know what they don't know, and then they don't know until the end that the product they got was not what they were told it was. And I've heard horror stories of this kind of stuff happening, and so I think what I'm trying to paint a picture for, because I feel like we had this conversation earlier talking about this ethical portion of it, right? And including all of the data and all the technologies and being upfront with everything. And which is why I'm asking you, which is why I invited you both on, is making it clear to people, like, this is what we can do. This is what's applicable, and to kind of remove the mystique around it, right? Because I feel like that's where it sits right now. It's kind of like talking about LiDAR in the forest inventory space right now. If you bring up the concept of LiDAR, people just say, it's perfect. It could solve all of our problems. And you're like, well, it's incredible. It's definitely an incredible technology. It definitely has a lot of rich data, but it also has the opportunity to sink your ship if you don't know what you're doing. I wanted to talk. That's why I'm asking these questions about limitations and where things are, because I think it's not clear even to someone like me where things sit, right? So that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah. I mean, in many markets that were active, the ground truthing exists. Now, if you have a historical carbon project, somebody will have gone in and sort of, when it was planted, you get some. Mostly you can count on that being the case, because there's some track record of documentation. Yeah. In Nordic's forest, it's certainly the case. But if you then go into, it sounds from what you're describing, into parts of Canada and so forth, where you don't have the ground truthing, we've basically looked at this and basically said, can you start to fly drones to generate training data?
Sure. And
that's something that we're reasonably optimistic that that's doable.
Yeah.
And because you need to get around the problem of, if there isn't ground truth, then there just isn't. And so effectively, we've tried to, from a data engineering, but also from a model perspective, we try to really make sense and get to a forest inventory with whatever data is there. And we've had a case where we basically flew out and not ourselves, but ordered a LiDAR flight. And, you need to design that also in statistically valid and plausible ways. But then that could become your ground truth as well. if you
Absolutely.
have no other way.
Well, and I agree too. Like I know, like you look at some of the data coming out now that we have with even just with aerial imagery, right? Not even drones, and with the LiDAR and aerial imagery you get there, just from an aircraft, it's incredible. And a lot of times, it's a lot of times I agree, it can be more dependable than ground data at times, right? Especially when you're talking about heights and that kind of thing, and even species at times, right? So, no, I definitely agree. I think there's huge opportunity to depend on the data itself, and ground truthing's not necessarily required, but you definitely have to have, it's a fine tuning thing, right? It's interesting. So you were talking about, first of all, let's talk about this, and then I want to jump into the carbon thing eventually. I want to talk about the carbon sequestration, the modeling there, how that works, how the AI is how you're applying the AI to this concept. But first of all, I want to talk one more thing about the tech. So I had mentioned before, I think there's this mystique around the concept of LiDAR, and I've seen lots of proposals for, LiDAR only inventories and this kind of thing. And it always makes me cringe, right? Cause they're just like, well, why not use the data that's available? You have all this data. You have old inventories. You have aerial imagery. You have LiDAR. You have all of this available to you. Why not use it? I think LiDAR is an incredible tool that does amazing things, right? Like we can get heights better than I think we've ever gotten them. We can do all kinds of things. We can get stems per hectare. We can get lots of cool stuff, but it still requires an understanding of the data and a breakdown of the data to understand what you're looking at, right? It's not it's not an easy button, right? And I think so I wanted to try to talk to you a little bit about this mystique around LiDAR and how you see how you seeing it applied to the work that you're doing. Is it is it the holy grail that we've all been waiting for, or is it just another thing that's going to be very, very helpful?
Basically, if there's a new customer, a new market, a new region, and they have LiDAR, we're happy campers. So it's really good. But there's kind of, and Christof, please add there's kind of two things to my mind that make have two limitations around a fantastic technology. Yes. One is it's expensive to fly. So, between the gaps of you being able to fly, there's a lot of room there, a lot of time there. And the other thing is kind of colorblind. And if you then augment it with it becomes a really, really nice technology, really something that can, do a lot of great stuff. So the moment there's LiDAR, we're happy campers to start a project. I mean, if there's not, then you start to work around. So what else can we do? Yeah. And so in that sense, it's a fantastic technology. It's highly accurate, and it's needed to validate results and so forth. And there is sort of it's in a way it reminds me of we were sort of researching the use of radar. And the problem was storm damage. And I remember reading this research paper ages ago, and the research paper was about should you use optical or radar for storm detection. And I looked at it and I thought, just the headline doesn't make sense. You use both.
Yeah.
And so, in many ways, it's been a bit surprising to us coming from a different area where you basically say, let's just take all the data you have and see where you land. This sort of kind of vertical approach to different data sets. And in a way, it's got, of course, skill driven. LiDAR is a skill. It's sort of analyzing LiDAR is a certain skill.
Absolutely.
And in that sense, you have people that will be skilled in LiDAR, and that from a skill perspective, that makes sense. I think from, driving a data-driven, having or pursuing data-driven insights, it doesn't make sense to limit yourself. So sort of in a long story short, it's fantastic technology, but why look at it in isolation?
Yeah, exactly. It's incredible. It really is probably the greatest technology breakthrough we've had in a very, very long time. But yeah, it's just another thing to add to the toolbox, right? And it does a lot of things, but it's not a one-all be-all, that's for sure. It's refreshing to hear you say that, because I think it's something that people get carried away with, right? That I think one of the things is, the reason I bring this up is I see a lot of people do presentations, right? And they show the LiDAR scan of, look, we can get species on a LiDAR scan. And I'm like, and the LiDAR scan they're showing you, they're talking about aerial scans, but the LiDAR scan they show you is a ground scan. It's a backpack scan. And you're like, well, you're not going to walk past every single tree in someone's forest to figure out what the species is. Like, it's not. And so I get concerned with you know what I mean? That selling a product that's not actually what they're showing you, right? And so that's where I get concerned. But however, that being said, you can get species from LiDAR. It doesn't look like that. So I like to talk about this kind of stuff because I think it's important to discuss the mystique around new technologies, because it's easy for people to get wrapped up in it and go, well, this is going to change everything and we're all going to be billionaires. I think it's important to talk about the limitations of these kind of things and talk about them in the real, in the pragmatic, in how are they actually applied, right? So, how have you taken? So let's jump into. I want to jump into the carbon thing. We've kind of been dancing around carbon sequestration and carbon modeling, and you talked a bit about greenwashing earlier. So yeah, where do you think the AI inventories come into providing maybe some solidity to the ideas of the carbon market?
Christof, why don't I start and then you jump in? Basically, when you look at the sort of whole carbon, the way of doing a carbon project, it's sort of, it's kind of Kyoto, put some stakes in the ground. Kyoto was 2002. So effectively, a lot of the approach to such a project, how you arrive at it, how you document things, how you claim your credit, how you, from a method perspective, come to calculating the credits. It is very, very, very old tech. I mean, effectively, in simplifying it, it's the ethos is, okay, we believe it if a forester has seen it. Mm-hmm. That made sense in the 90s. That made even sense in 2005 or something like that. But, we talked about LiDAR, now there's a lot of different technologies. And so I think the science is good. I think these are very, very, very worthwhile efforts that Vera and Gold Standards and others have done. That's all fantastic. But to my mind, in the last 10 years or so, they haven't caught up with what's possible with technology. And that's what we are trying to bring to this. There's definitely a fraction in this whole space that startups, founded, huge valuation, got a lot of money, and they go out and promise stuff they can't do. That's just, that's just the nature of a lot of these kind of companies. And we're just coming to this, unfortunately. It's true. There's definitely some of that we did, back in 2018 or so. But what we've done really is a verifiable, science-based, we can prove what we tell you. We hold back data to arrive at a calculation of the accuracy. All the things that are effectively a carbon project is set up to do. It's only that it's set up to do it manually. And so we are trying to convince the industry to move to something where, we can do this at scale. We can do it, data driven. We can do it a lot faster than getting a forester to fly out to verify each and every product. And that's sort of the big problem that has evolved. There's now so much growth in this space that the groundwork hasn't been done to say, how do we scale this? Now everybody's screaming and shouting at a effectively manual solution. And we need to get into the 21st century to say, how can technology help us to get there in a verifiable, solid scientific way? And that's what we're contributing. Yeah,
no, absolutely. So how do you think this technology changes something like the carbon market? Because I think we've struggled in the forest industry to apply the carbon market to the industry because there is this requirement to grow back. And so you have to prove the discussion has been, I'll just break it down for folks that might be listening that maybe aren't aware. To my understanding anyways, and I am by no means an expert, but my understanding is that the struggle with the forest industry from getting into the carbon market is that you can't get credit for things you have to do anyways. So you have to prove that whatever it is you are doing that is adding more carbon sequestration is not something that you would have been forced to or would have done anyways in best practices. So you have to go above and beyond to prove that you're actually sequestering more carbon for that reason alone, right? And so how does this technology help us help the forest industry find their place in that carbon market?
I mean, so there's some in the concept you just described is called additionality in the jargon, and you have to do something on top of what's called business as usual, or what you're doing anyways.
Yeah.
And we can't help with the policy decisions of what counts above additionality.
Of course,
and
yeah.
To some degree, we're trying to stay out of that, because we're building something that's modeling nature. We've got 60, 70 person years of development in the product, and now getting into carbon policy decisions is just going to be beyond us. And so we are just driving, in quotes, driving. Providing data-driven analytics. Right. And that's sort of what we focus on. So effectively, if somebody does a project, or, somebody wants to invest in a project and wonders, is that sensible? Is that, verifiable? Then we can provide a data-driven analysis of that. And that's
talking about, sorry, just want to break that down quickly. So basically saying that, if someone's looking to buy carbon credits, you can provide the data to back up the fact that those credits are legitimate.
Let's say one of the key things there is the baseline. We can provide the baseline analysis for somebody. And I actually, we're just discussing this last couple of weeks. So let's say you're a big investor. You're looking at, buying carbon in, I just pick randomly a country, Costa Rica, and somebody comes to you and says, here's the credits. Then you can look at that baseline, but it's a baseline done by the person who did the project. And the baseline is the key thing driving the profitability and the credits. And so effectively, we can provide a third opinion on that and say, this is what it is. And then you could, as a corporate, you could basically say, okay, I don't buy that baseline. I take that baseline, and therefore I price the credits on a third opinion, if you like. So it's something that we're at the moment, but it is we think we should do the analytics and should do that better than anybody else at scale. And then, there might be new methods, there is different standards and so forth. And we'd love to work with the standards, but if they're too slow, we might just have to go out and say, we can provide this to investors.
Yeah, that makes sense. Christof, do you have anything that you wanted to add to this conversation?
Yes,
I feel like you're chomping at
the bit. You got straight to the point, Matt, to the real core of the problem. When it comes to how could a forest owner, let's say in Canada or in Northern Europe, actually get into this carbon market. And it totally boils down to these policies and additionality, business as usual versus what can I do on top of it. This is a moving target. What is additional in one country may not be considered additional in the other country.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
And it has to do with basically how ambitious every country is, so to speak, and what has been the best practices there. And if the forest management practices are already very, let's say, advanced and already optimal, there is not that much you can do on top. Maybe you can do a bit more, let's say, in the area of biodiversity, like protecting areas that are worth protecting, of course.
Right. So value-added stuff.
Maybe sometimes you could do some land use change. You could maybe restore some forests that have been removed or destroyed for whatever reason. But the by far bigger potential globally is, I think, in the southern hemisphere, there is so much more impact that you can do by restoring tropical forests or converting former forests back in forests, or basically, it's called avoiding that more forests get cut down or burned for commercial reasons, or undoing what has happened in the past. Basically, those two things. There's just so much more potential for impact in the southern hemisphere compared to the Nordic forests. That this type of additionality claim is just so much harder to make.
That makes sense. Yeah. So maybe providing some more details around the afforestation and deforestation concepts in the Southern Hemisphere rather than, like, I'm assuming you're specifically talking a lot about like South America and those kind of places, right? So, I had another gentleman on talking about that a couple of years ago, and it totally makes sense.
Actually, a question to you, Matt,
Sure.
specifically for Canada. A lot of forests have been destroyed by fire in Canada. Yeah. And it may or may not be economically attractive to restore those forests, right? But this would be, in my opinion, a pretty textbook case of a forest carbon project, basically where you restore forests that would not be that much economic gain, but you do it nevertheless, and then that would definitely be considered additional.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and that is going on under certain there's certain programs. Like in Alberta, for example, we have an organization called the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, and that takes a bunch of the dues that forest companies pay, and it keeps it in a pot to pay for exactly those types of things, right? But those are above and beyond. So there is some of that going on. But you're right, in places like British Columbia, where we were talking whole landscapes have been, totally taken out, first by pine beetle and then by fire, or even places like California where they're dealing with this kind of thing. I think, absolutely. There's additionality there because a lot of it may come back naturally, but in places where the soil and duff has been completely destroyed, it may not come back naturally. It may take a very long time, and it may convert into non-forest types for sure. So I think you're right. I think there is definitely potential there, an opportunity there for additionality, specifically considering that, the way it went out, it wasn't like it was harvested and that's why it's not coming back. It's that it was burnt in we'll call it a freak whoops, where fire burnt hotter and faster and bigger than it should have, in the past. So I think you're absolutely right. There's definitely discussions around that going on for sure. And, it provides opportunity for sure for people to get into the carbon market. And it's just an interesting one, to say the least.
Yep. Another sort of Northern American discussion that we've had a while ago was there's, timber prices at a certain level. You've harvested at a certain rotation and so forth. And now the carbon price, kind of everybody's convinced, will continue to go up. So at some stage, you might see trees being left standing by a forest owner because they're kind of basically saying, okay, I'm just looking at this commercially. I get so much for the timber. Why don't I just leave it standing and start to create carbon on top of a certain threshold of where the forest was in the past? So if the carbon price continues to grow, then you could see that. But I'm completely with Christof, and we debated this internally a lot of times. The biggest impact is in Southern Hemisphere, but you will see from some corporates that they like it to have these projects in their home country, somewhere in their region. There's definitely some interest around that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's fascinating because it's, do you think so? How do you think that the AI, kind of moving on to, past the carbon stuff here, but how do you think it's going to change the way forest management happens? And maybe not just say AI, but the movement of technology and the speed of technology. Do you see, I know you're not foresters, so I don't expect you to have like a very nuanced, but I'm curious from your perspective, because you're seeing this every day. You're seeing, and not just in your local area, but you're seeing it, you're talking about, places from around the world. How is this technology changing the discussion around forest management, or changing the ideas or the way people are approaching it? Are you seeing any of that?
Well, we have been actually engaging with some national forest organizations, government forest organizations. Really in a very deeply, kind of in a joint digitalization project, so to speak, where there is actually also some change management happening in the organization, right? So by introducing AI-based inventories or AI-based methods in general, or digitalization in general, of course, the nature of the work of the organization changes a little bit.
Yeah.
So the focus starts to go away from, okay, how many field visits do I have to make to make the estimate correct, to get the estimate correct, to how can I basically adopt new policies that are coming out for doing more, let's say, sustainable forestry in general, taking care of certain constraints like what environmental protection aspects, or different new methods of forest harvesting, for example, instead of just doing clear cuts everywhere, which is definitely the simplest way of doing it, to more, let's say, continuous cover forestry, for example. So
that makes sense.
all of this requires additional bandwidth and human expertise, and it needs more tools, so to speak, to support it. So we are actually witnessing some change in the way how the people use their, let's say, their think time or their field work.
Right.
So they are just shifting to the human. We have even heard that it's sometimes hard to get a younger generation of forest experts who are actually able to do those measurements right on the ground.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of a transition to basically this repetitive work of measuring the trees is getting replaced with more higher quality work.
Absolutely. That makes sense. So it sounds like it's freeing up more opportunity to provide those additional value added things that the public is demanding of forest management, right? So which is awesome. Like those are the things that I think we all think about when we think about forests, right? We don't think about timber when I think about a forest. I think about trees, but I think about trees in the context of habitat, in the context of, clean water, and talking about, insects and animals. And that's what people think about. And so it feels like it's interesting. It feels like the increase in technology, what it's allowed us to do is it allowed us to go from being forced to think about only the wood fiber, just because that's what we had to do to make a buck and to make sure that things keep rolling, and to make sure that, and then from now, you still have to think about it, but there's a lot more time available and a lot more opportunity and a lot more, I'm not sure what the right word is, but a lot more opportunity to think about these value added projects and these value added things that provide more than just the timber and economy version, right? So it's, I think you're absolutely right. It totally makes sense. I see the same thing happening here, right? The increase of technology just increases everything over time. It's incredible. Rolf, anything?
I agree with that. And so it's kind of comes from two ways. One, tech can do a lot more. People don't become foresters in the same numbers that it will be required. The work is becoming more because we're taking better care of it. So yeah, I think things are pointing in the right direction and maybe in a narrow sense for us as a company, but I think overall in terms of the way we manage forests as a society, I think that there's a lot more interest here than there was a couple of years ago, and I think rightly so.
It's changing big time. Yeah. And it's interesting that we're privileged enough. This is the first time I think in history that we've been privileged enough as a people, as a human race, to be able to think about forests from these perspective, right? Because like Christof said earlier on, 300-400 years ago, it was just a matter of just heating your house and making sure you had enough wood to keep things going, right? And it was just survival. And it's only since the Industrial Revolution that we've had the opportunity with increased technology to start talking about the things we emotionally connect to and also physically need, like clean water and everything else, right? It's the first time in history, I think, where we've had the privilege of being able to do that. And I think it's exciting because I think you're starting to see people more connected to their own work, right? They see how their work impacts those values and how their work increases human standard of living and just life in general, right? It's very, very cool. And when I talk about technology. I'm not a very techie guy, but I am excited about what the technology offers, right? Which is why I was excited to speak with both of you today. So, finally, last kind of question before we finish things off, and whoever wants to answer it, it's good with me. But where do you? What's the next steps? Where do you see? What's your pipe dream, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think would be awesome that you're excited about? That you're like, if we could only figure this out, it would do all of these things. What is that for you right now?
Christof, you want to have a go?
Yeah. Well,
I'm sure you both have something.
My dream naturally is more and higher quality data.
But it does get better,
resolution, like everybody's. And it's actually happening. So it's a matter of time. And when we started the company, we were already seeing that it's kind of a exponential growth of proliferation of data. Also open data. I mean, there are already several new missions lined up in the European Space Agency, but also other, I don't know about, NASA probably has their own satellite observation agenda, and then there are all the private programs. And of course, there's also a lot more drone imagery, drone data collection going on. At some point, I think we will have just more data than we could ever dream of, and maybe even full country drone image coverage. And then when we get to that point, then what will happen is we will get basically a digital twin of the forest. So you have a digital equivalent of what's on the ground, and that is basically as good as it can get.
Wouldn't that be crazy? Like I imagine every mill has their own predator drone that they fly over the forest that gets 300, 400 hits per meter of LiDAR as long as and imagery at the same time, and you just got this. You can literally do virtual walkthroughs of your forest just in what do they call it, the virtual reality goggles. On
a limited scale, that's already happening, and it will just expand in scale. And when you are there, then you can do a lot of new things when it comes to planning. You can do much more tactical, much more fine-grained planning. You can basically design basically what route the operator should take through the forest for the optimal, let's say, most economic operation. Or you could even feed this into an autonomous or semi-autonomous machine doing that job.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible.
All of that will be guided with AI, right?
Pretty cool.
Well, at that point, you're talking to be like, okay, well, you could automate. Here's all the squirrel dens. This is where the deer like to feed, and this is where you would literally have, if you could find a place to host all that data. You'd have everything. Like you would just have everything, and it would be at that point you could just put these forest management decisions into like a decision matrix, and it would tell you what the best thing to do would be. Right? Like I was talking about that recently with somebody else too. Like it would be incredible to have that rich of data set. It would be just phenomenal. I guess it's only a matter of time, really, right? Who knows what that timeline looks like? But
what you actually describing, Matt, that just sparked a new idea here.
Oh, nice.
I mean, at some point, when you have such a digital twin of the forest, then of course you will have in parallel very economic way of using the forest economically, like for commercial purposes or for just as a resource for raw material, basically. Yep. And at the same time, you can design almost like a plan how to make it an optimal habitat.
Yep. Absolutely.
So you can think of what kind of changes, of course, such small changes. So you don't want to do big changes, right? But small changes that can make the forest more habitable.
Yes, absolutely. No, you're exactly right. Because I think as much as we were getting fine-tuned with forestry, it's still kind of the hammer approach when you talk about this idea, right? This idea is more of the tweezer approach, and you're talking about, okay, we know everything. There's nothing we don't know. And considering all the habitats and all the water and everything we need to know, we can make this perfect and optimize it for everything. And it would be an incredible dream that maybe we'll see in our lifetime, but I don't know.
I think we will see it in our lifetimes, and especially when it comes to biodiversity, this higher resolution data is needed, because with like 10-meter satellite data, you cannot see that much in terms of biodiversity. Maybe a bit about species variety and so on, but only when you get to this individual tree level, then you can do really amazing things about. You can basically find which trees could be really good, are more valuable than others, for example, biodiversity-wise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a cool idea. I like that.
Amen. Yeah, that was a pretty good lesson. But I mean, it sounds like a pipe dream, but I think I see ourselves on the path there. I wouldn't sort of necessarily want to venture a guess how many years, but I think we're on the path to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it is only a matter of time. How far away, I don't know. I have my guesses, but I'm not going to say them on this podcast. But I really appreciate you both coming on, taking the time to talk about your journey into forest management from the technological side, and I'm sure you've learned a lot and have provided a lot of value, and I'm excited to speak to you both and to kind of get some insight into where you think things are lying. So thank you both for everything. And was there any final thing that you wanted to say or finish off with any final thoughts before we sign off? If not, that's okay too.
We had the pipe. You had the pipe dream. And I was thinking, we're in forestry. The adaptation. I wish the adaptation was a bit quicker.
Right. Oh yeah.
Quite often, we're out and trying to convince people to adapt it. And as we're sort of really progressing fast, my sort of last wish is, let's just go out and apply what works today. And there's sometimes too much skepticism around that. That's sort of my final. But thank you very much for having us. I enjoyed. We both enjoy it greatly speaking to you. We really appreciate you giving us the platform, and thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome. And I appreciate talking to you. And it's nice to have, what I'm always thankful for with guests is having folks like yourselves who are willing to talk, openly and honestly about, where things are, where they aren't, what the dream is, and kind of just open up and let things be. That this is what we have, right? And so I appreciated your openness and your honesty, and this was really excellent. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, man. Again.
Thanks a lot for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I had a lot more specific questions I wanted to ask them, but I didn't want you all to fall asleep around the details, because it's some of these things that we talk about are only really exciting for the people that understand completely what's going on. So, I really appreciated both Christof and Rolf coming on to give me a hand and to suss out where things are at with this technology. It was just very, very cool. So thank you. Thanks a lot for joining me. We'll catch you all next time. If you got any questions for myself or any of my guests, shoot me an email, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time.